The scream that tore from Sophia Garrison's throat echoed across the dusty main street of Sacramento, California, causing every head within earshot to turn toward the commotion outside the land office. "I won't marry that giant," she cried, her green eyes blazing with defiance as she stared up at the imposing figure her father expected her to wed by the end of the month. It was the spring of 1872, and Sacramento had transformed from a rough gold rush town into a bustling city, yet the old ways still held firm in matters of family and duty. Sophia's father, Thomas Garrison, owner of the largest mercantile in town, had arranged her marriage to a wealthy rancher from the valley without so much as asking her opinion. The man in question, Bernard Hutchins, stood before her now, all 6 feet and 6 inches of him, his barrel chest straining against his vest, his thick fingers adorned with gold rings that spoke of his prosperity. But it was not his height that made Sophia recoil. It was the coldness in his pale eyes, the way his meaty hands had gripped her arm too tightly when they were introduced, the rumors she had heard whispered by the women at the general store about his first wife's mysterious death. "Sophia, control yourself," her father hissed, his face reddening as passers-by slowed their steps to witness the spectacle. "Mr. Hutchins is a respected man of means. You should be grateful." Grateful?" Sophia's voice cracked with emotion. "You are selling me like cattle, father. I am 20 years old, not a child, and I will not be bartered away to a man I do not love, do not trust, and certainly do not wish to marry." Bernard Hutchins let out a low chuckle that held no warmth. "Spirited, isn't she? I like a woman with fire. Makes the taming all the more satisfying." The way he said taming sent ice through Sophia's veins. She took a step backward, her heart pounding against her ribs. Her father reached for her, but she twisted away, gathering her skirts and running down the wooden boardwalk, ignoring the shocked gasps and her father's angry shouts. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to escape, had to think, had to find some way out of this nightmare. Her feet carried her past the last buildings on the edge of town, past the livery stable and the blacksmith's forge, until she found herself on the rutted road that led into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled forward, her lungs burning, her fashionable boots entirely unsuited for this terrain. She had no plan, no destination, only a desperate need to put distance between herself and the life her father had mapped out for her. An hour passed, perhaps more. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Sophia's throat grew parched. She had been foolish to run without water, without supplies, without even a shawl for when the evening cold set in. But pride kept her moving forward, even as exhaustion began to weigh on her limbs. Better to face the wilderness than return to that loveless arrangement. The road had narrowed to little more than a trail now, winding upward through clusters of oak and pine. Sophia's steps grew unsteady, and she did not see the loose stones beneath her feet until it was too late. Her ankle twisted viciously, sending her tumbling down a small embankment with a cry of pain. She landed hard on the rocky ground, her dress torn, her hands scraped raw, her right ankle throbbing with an intensity that made her stomach churn. She tried to stand but collapsed immediately, biting back a sob. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the realization of her predicament crashed over her like a wave. She was alone, injured, and miles from town with no one knowing where she had gone. Even her anger at her father could not mask the fear that gripped her now. The sound of heavy footsteps on the trail above made her freeze. Had Bernard or her father sent someone after her? She held her breath, praying whoever approached would pass by without noticing her. But the footsteps stopped. Then came the sound of boots sliding on loose rock as someone descended the embankment. Sophia looked up, prepared to plead or argue, and found herself staring at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, bare to the elbows where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard labor in the mountains. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were a startling shade of blue-gray, the color of a winter sky, and they regarded her with concern rather than threat. "You are hurt," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to emanate from somewhere in his broad chest. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Sophia tried to scoot backward, wincing as the movement sent pain lancing up her leg. "Stay back. I have nothing of value to steal." The giant man crouched down, and even in that position he seemed massive. "I am no thief. My name is Victor Young. I have a cabin about 2 miles north of here. That ankle needs tending, and night will fall soon. These hills are no place for an injured woman after dark." "I can manage on my own," Sophia said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew how ridiculous they sounded. She could barely move, let alone walk 2 miles back to Sacramento. Victor's expression did not change, but she thought she detected the hint of something that might have been amusement in those steady eyes. "You cannot even stand. Pride is a poor companion when mountain lions come hunting at dusk." The mention of mountain lions sent a fresh spike of fear through her. She had heard stories, of course, of the predators that roamed these foothills. Sophia looked at the stranger again, trying to assess whether he posed more danger than the wilderness itself. He wore simple clothes, a worn shirt and canvas pants, with a knife at his belt and a rifle slung across his back. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man accustomed to hard work. But those hands remained at his sides, making no move toward her. "If you mean me harm, there is little I can do to stop you," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I warn you, my father is a powerful man in Sacramento. He will hunt down anyone who hurts me." "Then it is fortunate I have no intention of hurting you." Victor stood slowly, as if not wanting to spook a frightened animal. "I'm going to pick you up now. The rough handling will hurt your ankle, but it cannot be helped. We need to reach my cabin before full dark." Before Sophia could protest, he bent and scooped her into his arms as if she weighed no more than a child. She gasped, both at the sudden movement and at the feel of the solid muscle beneath her hands, where she instinctively gripped his shoulders for balance. He was warm despite the cooling air, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing as he began to climb back up the embankment with surprising ease. "I can walk if you help me," she said weakly, though she knew it was not true. "No, you cannot. Your ankle is already swelling badly. Walking would do more damage." His tone was matter-of-fact, without condescension. "Hold still and let me carry you. Fighting will only make the journey harder for us both." There was sense in his words, and Sophia had little choice but to comply. She fell silent as Victor carried her up to the trail and then began walking north with long, steady strides that ate up the distance. Despite his size and the burden he carried, he moved with a surprising grace, picking his way over rough ground with the confidence of someone who knew these paths intimately. Sophia found herself studying his profile as they walked, the strong line of his jaw beneath the beard, the concentration in his eyes as he navigated the terrain. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and leather, scents she associated with the frontier rather than the perfumed parlors of Sacramento's better homes. Everything about him spoke of wildness and strength, yet he held her carefully, adjusting his grip whenever the trail grew rough to keep from jostling her injured ankle. "Why are you helping me?" she asked after several minutes of silence. "Why would I not?" He did not look at her, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. A person in need requires help. It is not complicated. Most men would expect something in return. Now he did glance down at her, and she saw something flicker in those blue-gray eyes. "I am not most men. And whatever trouble drove you into these hills is your own business, not mine." The directness of his words, the lack of judgment, loosened something in Sophia's chest. She had expected questions, accusations, perhaps even the opportunistic advances her father always warned her about. Instead, Victor Young simply carried her toward shelter without demanding explanations or payment. The trail wound higher into the foothills, and the landscape grew wilder. Dense stands of pine gave way to rocky outcroppings and small meadows where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. The air grew noticeably cooler, and Sophia shivered in her thin dress. Without breaking stride, Victor shifted her weight slightly and pulled his coat free with one hand, draping it over her. The garment was still warm from his body and smelled of wood smoke. She pulled it closer, grateful for the warmth. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once but said nothing, his attention focused on the darkening trail ahead. The sun had disappeared behind the mountains now, leaving only a golden glow on the horizon. Stars began to prick through the deepening blue overhead, and Sophia heard the first calls of night birds in the trees. Without Victor's presence, the sounds would have terrified her. Even now, being carried by a stranger into the wilderness, She felt an odd sense of safety in his solid, unshakable calm. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 40 minutes, they rounded a bend, and Sophia saw a cabin nestled in a small clearing. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney at one end and a covered porch across the front. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear the soft sounds of animals moving in the gathering darkness. Chickens, she thought, and perhaps a horse or mule. Victor carried her up the steps to the porch and used his boot to push open the door. The interior was dim, but he moved confidently, depositing her gently on a chair near the cold fireplace before lighting a lantern. Warm light spilled across the room, revealing a space that was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's dwelling. There was a large bed in one corner, neatly made, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and various tools and equipment hung on the walls. Everything had its place. Everything was clean and orderly. "Let me build up the fire, then I will look at that ankle," Victor said, already moving toward the hearth. His movements were efficient and practiced. Within minutes, flames were crackling over dry kindling, the fire building quickly to push back the chill of the mountain night. Sophia watched him work, her mind a tumult of emotions. She should be frightened, alone with this massive stranger in the middle of nowhere. But something about Victor's calm competence, the way he moved about his tasks without any apparent threat or expectation, made her feel oddly safe. Safer, in truth, than she had felt facing Bernard Hutchins in broad daylight on Sacramento's main street. Once the fire was blazing, Victor brought over a wooden stool and knelt before her chair. "I need to remove your boot and stocking to see the injury. I will be as gentle as possible, but it will hurt." Sophia nodded. Gripping the arms of the chair as he began to carefully unlace her boot. His hands, so large they seemed they could crush stone, worked with surprising delicacy. Even so, when he eased the boot off her swollen ankle, she could not suppress a gasp of pain. "I know," he said quietly, his eyes flicking up to her face. "The worst is over. The stocking now." He worked the silk stocking down her leg with the same careful attention, and Sophia felt heat rise to her face at the intimacy of the act. No man had ever touched her ankles, let alone her bare leg. But Victor's expression remained professional, almost clinical, as he examined the injury. "It is badly sprained but not broken," he announced after a careful inspection, his fingers probing gently along the swollen joint. "You were fortunate. A few days of rest with the ankle elevated and bound, and you will heal." "A few days?" Sophia's voice rose in alarm. "I cannot stay here for days. My father will be searching for me. There will be search parties." Victor stood and moved to one of his shelves, returning with strips of clean cloth and a jar of something that smelled strongly of herbs. "Then they will find you here, recovering from injury. Better than finding you dead on the trail because you tried to walk on a damaged ankle." He knelt again and began to apply the salve, which was cool and soothing against her inflamed skin. "Tell me your name." "Sophia. Sophia Garrison." She watched as he began to wrap her ankle with expert precision. "You seem to know much about injuries." "I have lived in these mountains for 8 years. A man learns to tend his own wounds, or he does not survive." His hands never paused in their work. "Why did you run into the hills alone, Sophia Garrison?" She had not intended to tell him, but something about the quiet of the cabin, the gentle movements of his hands, the lack of judgment in his tone, loosened her tongue. "My father arranged a marriage for me. To a man I fear, a man whose previous wife died under suspicious circumstances. When I refused, when I caused a scene in the middle of town, I panicked and ran. I did not think, I just ran." Victor finished binding her ankle and sat back on his heels, his blue-gray eyes meeting hers. "Your father is forcing you into marriage?" "He says it is for our family's good. Bernard Hutchins is wealthy, owns a large ranch. Father's business has been struggling, and this marriage would save us from financial ruin." Sophia heard the bitterness in her own voice. "But I do not trust Hutchins. There's something wrong with him, something dangerous. I would rather die an old maid than marry that man." "Then do not marry him." Victor's words were simple, as if the solution were obvious. "You make it sound easy. But I have no money of my own, no skills beyond embroidery and playing the piano. Without my father's support, I would have nothing." Victor stood and moved to the stove, adding wood to the fire there as well. There are always choices, even when they seem impossible. But that is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, you need food and rest. Your ankle will not heal if you are hungry and exhausted. He was right, and Sophia realized with some surprise that she was ravenous. She had not eaten since breakfast, and that felt like a lifetime ago. She watched as Victor moved about the cabin with practiced efficiency, pulling out supplies and beginning to prepare a meal. He worked with the same calm focus he brought to everything, and Sophia found it oddly mesmerizing. "How did you come to live up here alone?" she asked, as he sliced vegetables with a knife that looked tiny in his large hands. "I was a trapper originally, came west during the gold rush when I was barely 18. Spent years moving from camp to camp, working claims, hunting, trading furs. Then I found this place." He gestured around the cabin. "It was abandoned, falling apart. I rebuilt it, made it mine. After years of wandering, I wanted something permanent, something that belonged to me." "Do you not get lonely?" Victor was quiet for a moment, adding the vegetables to a pot hanging over the fire. "Sometimes, but I prefer solitude to bad company, and I'm not completely isolated. I trade in Sacramento a few times a year, sell furs and timber. I know people in town." "Do you know my father? Thomas Garrison? He owns the Mercantile on K Street. I have bought supplies there. A stern man with a good head for business." Victor ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. "He will be worried about you." Guilt twisted in Sophia's stomach. Despite her anger, she knew her father loved her in his way. He would be frantic by now, imagining all manner of disasters. "I know, but I could not stay. I could not smile and nod and agree to destroy my life for his business concerns." Victor brought her a bowl and a spoon, then settled into the other chair with his own meal. "Eat. We can discuss what to do in the morning when your head is clearer." The stew was simple but delicious, rich with venison and vegetables, seasoned with herbs she could not identify. Sophia ate with an appetite she would have been embarrassed to display in polite society, but Victor seemed to take no notice, focused on his own meal. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls, and despite the strangeness of her situation, Sophia felt some of the tension begin to drain from her body. When they had finished eating, Victor collected the bowls and cleaned them with quiet efficiency. "You will take the bed," he said, brooking no argument. "I have bedding for the floor. Your ankle needs to be elevated on the mattress." "I cannot take your bed," Sophia protested, but Victor was already gathering blankets and fashioning a pallet on the floor near the fire. "You can and you will. I have slept on harder surfaces than a cabin floor." He moved to the bed and turned down the quilts. "Do you need help getting there?" Sophia's face flushed again. The bed was only a dozen feet away, but she knew she could not walk or even hop on her injured ankle. Swallowing her pride, she nodded. Victor crossed to her and once again lifted her with that same easy strength, carrying her to the bed and lowering her gently onto the mattress. He propped her injured ankle on a folded blanket, positioning it carefully. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly aware of how close he was, how the firelight caught in his dark hair and made his eyes gleam. This close, she could see the individual scars on his hands and forearms, signs of a hard life lived in wild places. But there was gentleness in those scarred hands, a careful tenderness that belied his massive frame. Victor stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "Sleep now. You are safe here. I give you my word." And strangely, impossibly, she believed him. Sophia watched as he banked the fire for the night and extinguished the lantern, leaving only the glow from the hearth. She heard him settle onto his pallet, heard his breathing slow and deepen. Despite the unfamiliarity of the cabin, despite sleeping in her torn dress because she had no nightclothes, despite everything that had happened, Sophia felt her eyes growing heavy. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of the wind in the pines and the comforting knowledge that Victor Young lay between her and the door, a wall of muscle and calm protection against whatever dangers the night might hold. Sophia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly around the cabin. Morning light streamed through the windows, and for a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was. Then her ankle throbbed with a dull ache, and memory came flooding back. She pushed herself upright, wincing, and saw Victor standing at the stove, his back to her as he prepared breakfast. He had changed his shirt, she noticed, and tied his hair back again. Even from behind, his size was impressive, his shoulders filling the space as he worked. When he turned and saw her awake, he nodded in greeting. "How is the ankle?" Sophia tested it cautiously, flexing her foot. Pain flared, but not as intensely as the previous night. "Better, I think. Still quite painful, but the swelling seems reduced." "Good. The salve works quickly." He brought her a cup of coffee, the tin mug warm in her hands. "I will need to ride into Sacramento this morning. Your father deserves to know you are alive and safe." Reality crashed back over Sophia like cold water. In the strange peace of the cabin, she had briefly forgotten about her father, about Bernard Hutchins, about the marriage she was expected to accept. "When you tell him where I am, he will come for me. He will drag me back and force me to honor the agreement he made." Victor studied her over his own coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Would he truly force you, against your explicit refusal?" "He believes he is doing what is best for me, for our family. In his mind, my feelings are secondary to practical concerns." Sophia's hands tightened around the mug. "I do not know what to do. I cannot marry Bernard Hutchins, but I have no alternative to offer." "There is always an alternative." Victor sat down at the table, his large frame making the chair look small. "But first things first. I will go to town. Tell your father you are safe and recovering from an injury. That will give you time to think clearly about what you truly want. He will insist on taking me home immediately. I will explain that moving you would risk permanent damage to the ankle. It is not even a lie. You should not walk on it for at least 3 days." Victor drained his coffee and stood. "While I am gone, rest. There is food in the cabin, water in the bucket. Do not try to move around more than necessary." Sophia felt panic rise in her chest at the thought of being alone, but she forced it down. Victor was right. Her father needed to know she was alive. "Thank you. For everything." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. "You are welcome, Sophia Garrison. I will return before dark." Then he was gone, and Sophia heard the sounds of him preparing his horse, the creak of leather and the jingle of tack, followed by hoofbeats fading down the trail. She was alone in the cabin, surrounded by the evidence of Victor's solitary life, the tools and supplies of a man who needed no one. Yet he had not hesitated to help her, had shown her more kindness in one night than Bernard Hutchins had in their entire brief acquaintance. Sophia spent the morning resting and exploring the cabin as much as her limited mobility allowed. She found books on the shelves which surprised her, volumes on natural history, a collection of Shakespeare's plays, even some poetry. The mountain man was educated then, or at least well-read. There were also small carvings scattered around the room, animals mostly, rendered in wood with careful attention to detail. A deer, a bear, an eagle with wings spread. Each was beautiful in its simplicity, evidence of patient hours spent with knife and wood. She examined her ankle, pleased to see the swelling had indeed decreased. Victor's salve was remarkably effective. She rewrapped the bandage carefully, trying to copy the technique he had used. The act made her aware of how helpless she had been, how dependent on a stranger's mercy. It was not a comfortable feeling for someone who had always prided herself on propriety and self-sufficiency. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Sophia dozed, read from Victor's books, and worried. What would her father say? Would he demand she return immediately? Would he bring Bernard Hutchins with him, force her into some hasty ceremony before she could escape again? The more she thought, the more trapped she felt. It was late afternoon when she heard hoofbeats returning. Sophia's heart leaped into her throat as she pushed herself upright in the chair. But it was Victor who ducked through the doorway, alone, his expression unreadable. "Well?" she demanded. "What did he say? Is he coming?" Victor removed his coat and hung it on a peg, taking his time before answering. "Your father was relieved to hear you were safe. I told him about your ankle, about the need for rest and healing. He was not pleased, but he accepted the necessity." And Bernard Hutchins. "He was at the Mercantile when I arrived." Victor's jaw tightened, the first sign of strong emotion she had seen from him. "He demanded to know your exact location. Said as your future husband, he had the right to bring you home himself." Sophia felt ice flood her veins. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were recovering from injury and needed quiet and rest. I told him that any attempt to move you before the ankle healed could result in permanent damage. I also told him that if he tried to come up here, he would not be welcome." "You stood up to him?" Sophia's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Victor's blue-gray eyes met hers, and she saw steel beneath the calm surface. "I do not care how wealthy he is or what agreements he has made. You are under my roof, under my protection. He will not come here." Something warm and powerful stirred in Sophia's chest at his words. When had anyone ever stood up for her wishes, her well-being, over business interests and social expectations? "What did my father say to that?" "He was angry, but I think part of him was relieved. I saw it in his eyes when I mentioned your fears about Hutchins." Victor moved to the stove and began preparing food again, his hands busy with familiar tasks. "I suggested that he speak with other ranchers, investigate the circumstances of Mrs. Hutchins's death more carefully. I think he may do so. And in the meantime, you stay here until your ankle heals. We agreed on 1 week. That gives your father time to investigate, gives you time to decide what you truly want, and gives that swelling time to go down properly." Victor glanced at her over his shoulder. "Unless you want to go back now?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than she intended. "I do not want to go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Victor nodded as if this was exactly what he had expected to hear. "Then you will stay. But Sophia, you need to understand something. A week is not long. When it ends, you will have to make a choice. You cannot hide in these mountains forever." "I know." Sophia slumped in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. "But a week is better than nothing. A week to think, to plan, to figure out some path forward that does not end in marriage to a man I fear." They ate dinner in companionable silence, and afterward, Victor brought out one of his carvings and a knife, working the wood with steady, careful strokes. Sophia watched his hands, fascinated by the way such power could be channeled into such delicate work. The animal taking shape looked like a fox, its bushy tail curving around its body. "How did you learn to do that?" she asked. "My father taught me when I was young. He was a woodworker back in Pennsylvania before he died." Victor's eyes never left his work. "I find it peaceful. When your hands are busy, your mind can rest. I wish I had a skill like that, something useful and practical. You said you can embroider and play piano. Those are skills." "Parlor tricks," Sophia said dismissively. "Nothing that could earn me a living or give me independence." Victor paused in his carving, looking up at her with those steady blue-gray eyes. "Independence is not just about skills or money. It is about knowing your own mind, standing firm in your choices even when they are difficult. You ran from a marriage you did not want. That took courage, even if it was not well planned. Courage or foolishness? I ended up injured and lost in the wilderness, but not married to Bernard Hutchins." Victor returned to his carving. "Sometimes foolish courage is better than wise surrender." His words settled over Sophia like a warm blanket. He was right, in his simple, direct way. She had taken action, even if that action had been impulsive and dangerous. It was more than she had ever done before, more than most women in her position would dare. As the evening wore on and the fire burned low, Sophia found herself studying Victor more carefully. She noticed the way his hair fell forward when he leaned over his work, the concentration that creased his brow, the small smile that tugged at his lips when the carving came out just as he wanted. He was handsome, she realized with some surprise, in a rough, untamed way that was nothing like the polished gentleman of Sacramento society. There was something magnetic about his quiet strength, his unshakable calm, his complete lack of pretense or social games. When he finally set aside his carving and banked the fire for the night, Sophia felt disappointed that their time together was ending. She watched as he lifted her again, carried her to the bed, and arranged her ankle on its pillow. His hands lingered for just a moment longer than necessary as he adjusted the blankets, and their eyes met in the firelight. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for protecting me, for giving me time to think." "You are welcome." His voice was low, almost rough. "Sleep well, Sophia." As she drifted off, Sophia realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. In just 2 days, she had come to feel safer with this mountain man, this stranger, than she had ever felt in her father's house or in the company of Sacramento society. Victor Young was a giant, yes, but his hands were gentle and his heart was kind, and she was beginning to wonder if running into these mountains had been the best decision she had ever made. The next morning brought rain, a steady drizzle that drummed on the cabin roof and turned the world outside gray and misty. Victor went out to tend his animals, returning with his hair plastered to his head and his shirt soaked through. Sophia tried not to stare as he changed shirts near the fire, tried not to notice the sculpted muscles of his back and shoulders, the scars that marked his skin like a map of survival. She failed miserably and had to look away quickly when he turned and caught her watching. If he noticed her flushed face, he was gentleman enough not to mention it. Instead, he made them breakfast and settled in at the table with what looked like account books and papers. "What are those?" Sophia asked, curious despite herself. "Inventory lists. I need to calculate what I can trade in town next month, figure out how many pelts I still need to cure, how much timber I should cut." He gestured to the papers spread before him. "Living alone means doing all the work of running a business myself. May I see?" Victor looked surprised but pushed the papers toward her. Sophia pulled her chair closer to the table, propping her injured ankle on a stool, and examined his figures. The handwriting was rough but legible, the math sound but basic. She noticed several places where better organization could improve his record-keeping. "You could use a ledger system," she said, thinking aloud. "Separate columns for different categories of goods, a running total of your expenses versus your income. It would make it easier to see at a glance where your profit is coming from." Victor watched her with interest. "You know bookkeeping?" "My father used to let me help with the mercantile accounts when I was younger, before he decided it was not appropriate work for a young lady." Sophia heard the bitterness in her own voice. "I enjoyed it, actually. The numbers made sense in a way that social calls and needlework never did." "Show me," Victor said simply. So Sophia spent the rainy morning reorganizing Victor's papers, creating a proper ledger system with his inventory and sales figures. She lost herself in the work, enjoying the puzzle of making order from chaos. Victor watched for a while, then returned to his carving, the two of them working in comfortable silence, broken only by the patter of rain and the crackle of the fire. When she finally looked up, hours had passed and the rain had lessened to a fine mist. Victor had made lunch at some point and set a plate beside her without interrupting her concentration. The gesture touched her more than she wanted to admit. "There," she said, pushing the completed ledger toward him. "You can see much more clearly now where your money is coming from and where it is going. And if you keep it updated each month, you will be able to plan better for the future." Victor studied the neat columns and careful figures, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at her with something that might have been admiration in those blue-gray eyes. "This is impressive work, Sophia. You have a talent for this." "It is just numbers and organization, nothing special." "It is special to me. I've been managing my business by guesswork and instinct. This is much better." He stood and moved to one of his shelves, returning with a leather-bound book that looked brand new. "I bought this in Sacramento last month, thinking I should start keeping better records. But I had no idea how to use it properly. Would you be willing to show me, to help me set up the system correctly?" Sophia felt a flush of pleasure at the request. "I would be happy to, if you truly want my help." "I do." Victor's tone was sincere. "Your father is a fool if he thinks bookkeeping is not appropriate work for you. You clearly have a gift for it." The compliment warmed her far more than any pretty words about her appearance or accomplishments ever had. This was recognition of something real, something useful, something that mattered. She smiled at Victor, and he returned it, his teeth white against his dark beard. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together, Sophia explaining her system while Victor listened attentively and asked thoughtful questions. He was intelligent, she realized, despite his lack of formal education. He grasped concepts quickly and made intuitive leaps that showed real business acumen. Working with him was effortless, natural, as if they had been business partners for years rather than strangers thrown together by chance. As evening approached and Victor prepared dinner, Sophia found herself studying him again. He moved around the cabin with unconscious grace despite his size, his movements economical and sure. Everything he did well, without fuss or show. There was something deeply attractive about that competence, that quiet mastery of his environment. "Victor," she said suddenly, surprising herself, Why did you really help me? You could have left me on that trail or brought me to town instead of your cabin. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger?" He was silent for a long moment, stirring the pot over the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. 8 years ago, when I first came to these mountains, I was injured in a rock slide. Broke my leg badly, had no supplies, no shelter. I thought I was going to die. Then an old Miwok man found me, brought me to his camp, tended my injuries. He saved my life, even though I was a stranger, even though my people had done his people nothing but harm. Victor turned to face her, his expression serious. I asked him why he helped me. He said that kindness is not about deserving or earning. It is about seeing someone in need and having the ability to help. He said that the measure of a man is not in what he takes from the world, but in what he gives back. He paused, his blue-gray eyes meeting hers. I found you in need. I had the ability to help. It is as simple as that. Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. In her world, nothing was ever simple. Everything came with strings attached, with expectations and obligations and social calculations. But Victor's world operated on different rules, older rules, rules that made more sense to her heart, even if society would call them naive. "That is a beautiful way to live," she whispered. "It is the only way I know how to live." Victor brought her a bowl of stew, his hand brushing hers as he passed it over. The contact sent a little spark up her arm, and she saw his eyes widen slightly, as if he had felt it too. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, charged with an awareness that had not been there in previous days. Sophia found herself hyper-conscious of every movement Victor made, every time his eyes drifted in her direction, every accidental brush of contact between them. Something was shifting in the air of the cabin, something that both excited and frightened her. After dinner, as had become their habit, Victor worked on his carving while Sophia read from one of his books. But tonight, the words blurred on the page, and she kept finding her gaze drawn to the man across from her. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong bones of his face, the concentration in his eyes, the way his large hands moved with such delicate precision. She wondered what it would feel like to have those hands touch her, not just to carry her or tend her injury, but to truly touch her with intention and tenderness. The thought made her face burn, and she quickly looked back at her book. But her heart was racing, and she knew something had changed between them, something irrevocable and profound. When Victor finally set aside his carving and prepared to carry her to bed, Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. His arms slid under her with familiar ease. But tonight, she was acutely aware of the strength in them, the warmth of his body through his shirt, the way his heart beat steady and strong beneath her hand. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Sophia," he said, her name rough on his tongue. Then he seemed to catch himself, shaking his head slightly as he carried her to the bed. "Your ankle is healing well. Another few days and you will be able to walk again." It was the right thing to say, the practical thing. But Sophia felt a stab of something that might have been disappointment. Another few days, and she would have to leave this cabin, leave this strange, peaceful existence, leave Victor. The thought was unbearable. As he lowered her onto the mattress, she caught his arm, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. "Victor, what if I do not want to go back?" He froze, his face inches from hers. "You cannot stay here forever. This is not your world." "How do you know?" "Maybe this is exactly where I am meant to be." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, raw and honest. "In 3 days here, I have felt more myself than in 20 years in Sacramento. I have done work that matters, had conversations that are real, been treated like a person rather than a pawn in someone else's game." Victor's jaw clenched, and she saw conflict warring in his eyes. "Sophia, you do not know what you are saying. You are grateful for help, for safety. That is natural. But gratitude is not the same as truly wanting this life. You think I am confused, that I do not know my own mind?" She tightened her grip on his wrist, feeling the tendons flex beneath her fingers. "I am not a child. Victor, I know the difference between gratitude and something deeper." For a long moment they stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Then Victor gently but firmly extricated his wrist from her grasp and stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "You should sleep," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow we will talk about practical matters, about what you will do when the week ends. But not tonight. Tonight you are tired, and your emotions are running high." Sophia wanted to argue, wanted to pull him back and make him acknowledge what was growing between them, but she could see the rigid control in his posture, the way he held himself so carefully away from her. He was right that she was tired, that her emotions were tangled and intense, but she was also right that something real was happening here, something that terrified him as much as it thrilled her. She lay back against the pillows, watching as Victor banked the fire and settled onto his pallet. "Good night, Victor," she called softly into the darkness. "Good night, Sophia." But sleep was a long time coming for both of them. The next morning brought brilliant sunshine and a tension that hung over the cabin like morning mist. Victor was polite but distant, focusing on practical tasks and avoiding anything resembling intimate conversation. Sophia tried to follow his lead, but frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior. They were dancing around something important, and his determination to ignore it only made it more present. By afternoon, Sophia's ankle had improved enough that she could hobble short distances with Victor's help. He fashioned a rough crutch for her from a sturdy branch, and she practiced moving around the cabin, regaining her independent step by painful step. The activity was good for her body, but did nothing to ease the restlessness in her heart. On the fourth day, Victor announced he needed to check his trap lines in the higher elevations and would be gone most of the day. Sophia watched him prepare his supplies with a sinking feeling, already missing him, though he had not yet left. "Will you be all right here alone?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. "I'm not helpless," she said, more sharply than she intended. Then, softer, "I will be fine. Go do what you need to do." He hesitated at the door, one hand on the frame, his broad shoulders filling the opening. For a moment she thought he might say something important, might address the thing that crackled between them, like lightning before a storm. But he simply nodded and left, his footsteps fading down the trail. Alone in the cabin, Sophia found herself at loose ends. She tidied up, organized Victor's supplies, updated his ledger with the latest figures. But these tasks did not quiet the turmoil in her mind. The week was more than half over. Soon she would have to make a decision about her future, and the only future she could envision was right here, in this cabin, with the mountain man who had saved her life and captured her heart. Because that was the truth she could no longer deny. Somewhere between being carried through the wilderness and working side by side over ledgers, between quiet evenings by the fire and the gentle touch of his hands tending her injury, she had fallen in love with Victor Young. Not the shallow infatuation of girlhood, but something deep and certain and irrevocable. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his quiet wisdom and his rough honesty, his competence and his kindness. She loved the way he saw her as a person, not a pretty ornament or a business asset. She loved the life he had built here, self-sufficient and peaceful, away from the games and pretensions of society. But did he love her? Or did he see her only as a responsibility, a wounded creature to be tended and then released back to her proper place? The question tormented her as the hours crawled past. When Victor finally returned in the late afternoon, his pack heavy with pelts, Sophia had worked herself into a state of emotional exhaustion. She watched him enter the cabin, watched him set down his burden and stretch his broad shoulders, watched the way the fading sunlight caught in his dark hair. And something inside her simply broke. "I am not going back," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "When the week ends, I am not returning to Sacramento. I will not marry Bernard Hutchins, and I will not be forced into a life I do not want." Victor froze in the act of removing his coat. "Sophia, we discussed this. You cannot run forever." "I am not running. I am choosing." She pushed herself up from her chair, balancing on her good foot and her crutch. "I am choosing this life, this place. I am choosing freedom and honesty and work that matters. I am choosing you." The words hung in the air between them, bold and terrifying and true. Victor turned slowly to face her, his expression unreadable. "You do not know what you are saying. You have been here less than a week. You have no idea what life in these mountains is truly like, how hard it can be, how lonely." His voice was rough, almost angry. Winter here is brutal. The nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. There are no parties, no society, no comforts. You would be giving up everything you have ever known. Everything I have ever known has been a cage, Sophia shot back. A pretty cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. Here, I feel free. Here, I feel like myself. She took a hobbling step toward him. Tell me you do not feel this thing between us. Tell me you have not noticed the way we fit together, the way we understand each other without needing to explain. Victor's hands clenched into fists at his sides. What I feel does not matter. You are young, beautiful, educated. You could have any man in Sacramento once your father cancels the arrangement with Hutchins. You could have a fine house, servants, a comfortable life. Why would you throw all that away for a mountain man who can offer you nothing but a rough cabin and hard work? Because that mountain man sees me, Sophia said, her voice breaking. Because he treats me like I have value beyond my appearance or my family connections. Because when I am with him, I feel safe and challenged and alive all at once. She took another step, closing the distance between them. Because I love him. The confession fell into the space between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples in every direction. Victor stared at her, his blue-gray eyes wide with shock, and something else, something that looked like longing barely held in check. You cannot love me, he said hoarsely. You barely know me. I know you carry wounded women through miles of wilderness without expecting anything in return. I know you stand up to bullies and protect those weaker than yourself. I know you read poetry and carve beautiful things and speak with wisdom about kindness and humanity. Sophia reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it flat against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm, as fast as her own. I know your hands are gentle despite your strength. I know your spirit is good and true. What else do I need to know? Victor covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers engulfing hers. Sophia, he whispered, and her name on his lips was a prayer and a plea. I'm afraid. Afraid that you will come to regret this choice, regret me. Afraid that I will fail to give you the life you deserve. The life I deserve is one where I am free to make my own choices, where I am valued for my mind as much as my appearance, where I can work and contribute and matter. She stepped closer still, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The life I deserve is with you, Victor Young, if you will have me. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his face a landscape of warring emotions. Then something seemed to break in him, and he pulled her close with a groan that was half surrender, half relief. His arms came around her, careful of her injury, and she pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and leather and him. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you on that trail, Victor confessed, his deep voice rumbling beneath her ear. Defiant and hurt and fierce despite your fear. Every day since then has only made it stronger. But I told myself it was impossible, that you belonged to a different world, that I had no right to want you. Sophia pulled back enough to look up at him, her hand coming up to cup his bearded jaw. You have every right, and I belong wherever I choose to belong. I choose here. I choose you. Then she rose on her toes, balancing precariously on her injured ankle, and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Victor remained still, as if he could not quite believe this was happening. Then he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head with infinite tenderness. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, two people learning each other for the first time. But it deepened quickly, passion held in check for days finally finding release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Are you certain? Truly certain? Because once we go down this path, once I make you mine, I will not let you go. I will fight your father, fight society itself if I must. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Sophia smiled up at him, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. I am already yours, Victor. I have been since you carried me out of the wilderness. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms tight around her as if he feared she might disappear if he loosened his hold. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were blazing with emotion. That's for her. Then we will face whatever comes together, he said. Your father, Hutchins, all of it. But Sophia, you need to understand what you are choosing. Life here is hard. I cannot give you silk dresses or fancy dinners. The winters are cold, the work is constant, and there will be times when you are lonely for company beyond my own. I do not care about silk dresses. I care about freedom and purpose and love. Sophia traced the line of his jaw with her fingers, marveling that she had the right to touch him like this. I care about building a life with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. I care about you. Victor swept her up in his arms again, but this time it was different. This time he held her like something precious, something cherished, and when he carried her to the bed, it was not just to elevate her ankle. He laid her down gently and stretched out beside her, fully clothed, propriety maintained, even as everything between them had changed. "We will do this properly," he said, his hand stroking her hair with reverent gentleness. "I will speak to your father, ask for your hand the right way, and if he refuses, if he tries to force the marriage with Hutchins, then we will find another solution. But I will not dishonor you, Sophia. I will not give anyone cause to say I took advantage of your circumstances." His old-fashioned courtesy touched her deeply. "You could never dishonor me. You have shown me nothing but respect and kindness from the first moment we met. And I will continue to do so, for the rest of my life, if you will let me." Victor's blue-gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I love you, Sophia Garrison. I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old with you in these mountains. But I want to do it right." "I love you too," Sophia whispered, the words feeling like the truest thing she had ever said. "And yes, 1,000 times yes." They lay together as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams. Victor told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his parents who had died when he was young, about his years wandering the West before finding this place. Sophia told him about her mother who had died when she was 12, about the pressure to be perfect, to be ornamental, to never question or challenge. They talked until the stars came out, until exhaustion finally claimed them both, and they drifted into sleep wrapped in each other's arms, fully clothed but closer than Sophia had ever been to another human being. When morning came, Victor rode into Sacramento with a determined set to his jaw. Sophia waited at the cabin, her heart in her throat, praying that her father would see reason, would understand that she had found something real and true and worth fighting for. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Sophia cleaned the cabin, made lunch, tried to read, but her thoughts kept circling back to Victor, to what he might be saying, to how her father might react. She knew Thomas Garrison was a stubborn man, proud and set in his ways. But she also knew that beneath his stern exterior, he loved her. Surely he would not force her into a marriage she feared when presented with an alternative that made her happy. It was late afternoon when hoofbeats approached the cabin. Sophia hobbled to the door, her heart pounding, and relief flooded through her when she saw Victor riding up the trail alone. But the grim set of his face told her the news was not good. He dismounted and came to her, his expression dark. "Your father refuses to even consider it. He says Bernard Hutchins has paid money toward the arrangement, that backing out now would ruin his reputation and his business. He says I am a nobody, a mountain hermit with nothing to offer you." Victor's hands clenched into fists. "He gave me until tomorrow to bring you back to town, or he will come here with the sheriff and force you to return." Sophia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What do we do?" Victor pulled her close, his arms a fortress around her. "We leave. Tonight. I have friends in the mining camps to the north, people who owe me favors. We can be married there by a justice of the peace. Make it legal before your father can interfere. Once we are married, there is nothing he can do." "But your cabin, your life here, you would give all that up for me?" "I would give up everything for you." Victor's voice was fierce. "The cabin will still be here when the dust settles, but you are irreplaceable. I will not lose you, Sophia. Not to your father's pride, not to Hutchins's money, not to anything." Sophia felt tears stream down her face. "Then yes, we leave tonight. We run toward our future together." They spent the next hours in a flurry of preparation. Victor packed supplies, food, blankets, everything they would need for the journey north. Sophia gathered what little she had, her borrowed clothes and the small personal items Victor had purchased for her in town. As the sun set, they loaded everything onto Victor's horse and a pack mule he kept in the barn. "Can you ride?" Victor asked, concern in his eyes as he looked at her ankle. "I will manage. Fear is an excellent motivator." Sophia tried to smile, but her heart was hammering with a mixture of excitement and terror. She was running away, truly running away this time, leaving behind everything she had ever known for an uncertain future. But that future was with Victor, and that made all the difference. They rode through the night, Victor leading the way on trails he knew by heart even in darkness. Sophia clung to her horse, her ankle throbbing but her spirit soaring. Behind them, Sacramento and her old life receded with every hoofbeat. Ahead lay freedom, love, and the promise of a life built on choice rather than obligation. Dawn found them high in the mountains, the peaks painted gold and pink by the rising sun. Victor called a halt near a small stream, and they made camp to rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. Sophia was exhausted, her whole body aching, but she had never felt more alive. "Are you all right?" Victor asked, helping her down from her horse with gentle hands. "I am perfect," she said honestly, "tired and sore, but perfect." He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face, and kissed her softly. "We have another day's ride to reach the mining camp. Think you can manage?" "With you? I can manage anything." They spent 2 more days traveling north, sleeping under the stars, talking and planning and dreaming. Victor showed Sophia the wilderness through his eyes, pointed out animal tracks and edible plants, taught her how to read the land and the weather. He was patient with her inexperience, encouraging with her efforts, and Sophia felt herself growing stronger, more confident with each passing hour. On the 3rd day, they reached a rough mining camp called Rough and Ready, a collection of tents and shacks perched precariously on the side of a mountain. Victor rode straight to the largest structure, a combination saloon and general store, and helped Sophia dismount. A burly man with a scarred face and kind eyes emerged from the building, breaking into a huge grin when he saw Victor. "Victor Young, you old bear! What brings you to our humble establishment?" "Marriage, Sam. This is Sophia Garrison, and I need a justice of the peace and 2 witnesses. Today, if possible." Sam's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline, but he did not question further. "Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I would see you get hitched, but if you are sure, old Joe Morrison serves as justice when we need one. Let me round him up and find some witnesses." Within an hour, Sophia found herself standing in the rough saloon, Victor's hand warm and solid in hers, while a grizzled old miner with spectacles and an official-looking book performed a marriage ceremony. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding she had once imagined as a girl, no flowers or music or fancy dress. Just simple words spoken with deep sincerity, 2 witnesses who were clearly curious but kind, and a man she loved more than life itself, promising to cherish and protect her for the rest of their days. "I do," Sophia said when her turn came, her voice clear and sure. "I do," Victor echoed, his blue-gray eyes locked on hers. "Then by the power vested in me by the great state of California, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, son." Victor pulled Sophia close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring about their audience, his hands cradling her face like she was something infinitely precious. When they broke apart, the witnesses were cheering and Sam was pouring whiskey for toasts. "To Victor and Sophia Young," Sam called out, raising his glass, "may your love be as strong as these mountains and as lasting as the stars." They drank and celebrated, and Sophia felt giddy with joy and relief. She was married to Victor Young, the mountain man who had saved her life and won her heart. Her father could rage, Bernard Hutchins could threaten, society could gossip. None of it mattered now. She was Victor's wife, and he was her husband, and they would face the future together. That night, in a small room above the saloon that Sam offered them as a wedding gift, Victor made love to his wife with a tenderness that brought tears to Sophia's eyes. He was so careful, so gentle, treating her like something fragile, even as passion built between them. When he finally joined their bodies, it was with whispered words of love and reverence, and Sophia felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. I love you, she breathed against his shoulder as they lay tangled together afterward, her injured ankle entirely forgotten in the haze of contentment that wrapped around them. I love you, Victor murmured back, his large hand stroking her hair. My brave, beautiful wife, thank you for choosing me. Thank you for being worth choosing. Sophia pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his steady heartbeat. Thank you for showing me what love truly looks like. They stayed in Rough and Ready for 2 more days, letting Sophia's ankle finish healing and enjoying the bubble of newlywed bliss before facing the reality waiting for them in Sacramento. Sam and his friends were generous with their congratulations and advice, and Sophia found she liked the rough honesty of the mining camp, the way people were valued for their character rather than their pedigree. But they could not hide forever. On the 3rd morning, Victor announced it was time to return home, to face whatever consequences awaited them. Sophia's stomach churned with anxiety, but she mounted her horse without complaint. They had done nothing wrong. They had married legally and properly. Her father would simply have to accept it. The ride back to Victor's cabin took 2 days, and with each mile, Sophia felt her resolve strengthen. She was not the same frightened girl who had run into these mountains barely 2 weeks ago. She was a married woman, a partner in a life she had chosen, and she would not be cowed by her father's disapproval or society's judgment. When they finally arrived at the cabin, they found evidence that someone had been there. The door stood ajar, and inside, the neat order had been disturbed. Papers were scattered, some of Victor's belongings moved or searched. Sophia felt violation burn in her chest. Your father, Victor said grimly, surveying the damage. Looking for evidence of where we went, most likely. They cleaned up together, restoring order to their home. Their home. Sophia loved the sound of that. This rough cabin in the mountains with its handmade furniture and simple comforts was more truly hers than her father's elegant house in Sacramento had ever been. 2 days after their return, hoofbeats announced visitors. Sophia and Victor stepped out onto the porch together, Victor's arm around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and proprietary. Her father rode into the clearing, and with him came not Bernard Hutchins, but Sheriff Davidson, a fair man Sophia knew slightly from town. Thomas Garrison's face was thunderous as he dismounted. Sophia, thank God. We thought that man had kidnapped you, or worse. That man is my husband, Sophia said clearly, holding up her left hand where a simple gold band now circled her finger. Victor had bought it from Sam before they left Rough and Ready, and Sophia treasured it more than any diamond. His name is Victor Young, and we were married 3 days ago by a proper justice of the peace with witnesses and documents. Her father's face went from red to white. Married? You cannot be serious. Sophia, this is madness. That marriage is not valid. You are still contracted to Bernard Hutchins. I was never legally contracted to anyone. You made an arrangement without my consent, which has no legal standing. Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady. I am 20 years old, Father, well past the age of majority. I have married the man I love, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Sheriff Davidson cleared his throat. If the lady is telling the truth, Mr. Garrison, and the marriage was performed by a proper justice, then it is indeed legal and binding. Your agreement with Mr. Hutchins, lacking the lady's signature or consent, holds no legal weight. This is preposterous. Thomas Garrison's voice shook with rage. She was seduced, taken advantage of while injured and vulnerable. I demand you arrest this man for kidnapping and assault. I was neither kidnapped nor assaulted, Sophia said firmly. Victor saved my life when I injured my ankle running from a marriage I did not want. He provided shelter, medical care, and complete respect for my person. He offered me choices when you offered me none. And when I told him I loved him, when I chose to marry him, he made sure everything was done properly and legally. The sheriff looked between them, clearly assessing the situation. Miss Garrison looks well and unharmed to me, and she is speaking clearly and rationally. Unless you have evidence of coercion or wrongdoing, Mr. Garrison, there is nothing I can do here. She is my daughter. I have rights. You have the right to your opinion and your disapproval, but you do not have the right to dissolve a legal marriage or force your adult daughter into an arrangement against her will. Sheriff Davidson's tone was kind but firm. My advice is to go home, Mr. Garrison. Let tempers cool. Maybe in time, you and your daughter can reconcile. Reconcile? Thomas Garrison's laugh was bitter. She has thrown away everything, ruined her future, for a mountain hermit with nothing to his name. She will regret this, mark my words. When the romance fades and she realizes what she has given up, she will come crawling back, and I will not be there to save her." The words cut deeply, but Sophia lifted her chin. "I will never regret choosing love over gold, freedom over obligation, respect over control. I am sorry you cannot understand that, Father, but I am not sorry for my choice." For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across the clearing. Then Thomas Garrison turned away, mounting his horse with jerky movements. "You are no daughter of mine," he said, his voice breaking. "I will tell everyone you are dead. It will be easier than explaining this shame." He rode away without looking back, and Sophia felt tears stream down her face despite her brave words. Victor's arm tightened around her, pulling her close to his solid warmth. Sheriff Davidson remained behind, looking uncomfortable. "For what it is worth, Mrs. Young, I think you made the right choice. I have heard disturbing things about Bernard Hutchins since you disappeared. Your father hired investigators, and what they uncovered about his first wife's death was not good. I was actually coming to speak with your father about canceling the marriage arrangement when you ran off." He tipped his hat. "I wish you both happiness." When the sheriff had ridden away, Sophia sagged against Victor, her legs suddenly weak. He scooped her up and carried her inside, settling them both in the large chair by the fire. She cried against his chest, mourning the loss of her father's approval, even as she knew she had made the right choice. "He will come around," Victor murmured, stroking her hair. "Give him time. When he sees how happy you are, how well you are thriving, his love for you will overcome his pride. And if it does not, then it will be his loss, not ours. We have each other, and that is enough." Sophia looked up at her husband, at the strength and certainty in his face, and felt her sadness begin to ease. He was right. They had each other, and they had a life to build together. That was more than enough. The months that followed were the happiest of Sophia's life. She threw herself into learning the skills she needed for mountain living, and Victor proved a patient teacher. She learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve food for winter, to identify useful plants and avoid dangerous ones. Her hands, once soft and useless, grew calloused from work, and she took pride in every blister and scrape as evidence of her growing competence. Victor, in turn, benefited from Sophia's bookkeeping skills and education. Together, they expanded his trading operation, identified more profitable markets for his goods, and even discussed starting a small timber operation come spring. They were true partners, each contributing their strengths, each learning from the other. As autumn painted the mountains gold and crimson, Sophia made a discovery that filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was with child. Victor's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, his eyes bright with tears, and whispered words of love and gratitude into her hair. They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and futures, about how they would need to expand the cabin before winter truly set in. Winter in the Sierra Nevada was as brutal as Victor had warned, with snow piling high and temperatures that made Sophia's bones ache. But the cabin was snug and well supplied, and there was something deeply satisfying about weathering the storms wrapped in her husband's arms, safe and warm while the wind howled outside. Victor carved a cradle from pine, each detail rendered with love, and Sophia sewed tiny clothes from fabric they had traded for in Sacramento. It was during a supply run to town in early spring that they encountered Thomas Garrison again. Sophia was heavily pregnant now, her belly round under her practical wool coat. She and Victor had just left the general store when her father emerged from his mercantile across the street. He stopped dead at the sight of them, his eyes going to Sophia's obvious condition. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Thomas Garrison crossed the muddy street toward them. "Sophia," he said, his voice rough, "you look well." "I am well, Father. Very well indeed." Sophia laid a protective hand on her belly. "This is your grandchild. Due in about 6 weeks, the doctor says." Her father's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I have been a fool, a stubborn, prideful fool. I was so focused on what I thought was best that I never stopped to ask what you wanted, what would make you happy." He looked at Victor, really looked at him for the first time. I have made inquiries about you, Mr. Young. Everyone I spoke with spoke highly of your character, your honesty, your skill. I was wrong to judge you." "What made you change your mind?" Victor asked, no accusation in his tone, only curiosity. "Bernard Hutchins was arrested 3 weeks ago. They found evidence that he murdered his first wife for her property. There are 2 other women who have come forward with stories of abuse and violence." Thomas Garrison's voice shook. "If Sophia had married him, if I had forced that match, she might be dead. Instead, she is alive and glowing with happiness, about to give me a grandchild." He turned back to Sophia. "Can you ever forgive me?" Sophia felt tears stream down her face as she stepped forward and embraced her father. "Of course I forgive you. You are my father, and I love you. I always have, even when I was angry with you." The reconciliation was gradual, not instant. But over the following weeks, Thomas Garrison made genuine efforts to know and respect Victor, to understand the life his daughter had chosen. He even traveled to the cabin once, his expression one of surprise as he saw the neat, well-run homestead, the evidence of hard work and prosperity, the obvious love between his daughter and her mountain man husband. When Sophia gave birth in late May, it was her father who rode through the night to fetch the doctor, who paced the porch alongside Victor while Sophia labored, who wept with joy when he held his grandson for the first time. They named the baby Samuel Thomas Young, honoring both Sam from Rough and Ready, who had helped them marry, and Thomas Garrison, who had found the courage to admit his mistakes. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. 2 more children joined their family, a daughter named Rose and another son they called Benjamin. The cabin was expanded, then expanded again, growing into a proper homestead. Victor's timber business flourished, with Sophia managing the accounts and negotiating contracts. They were not wealthy by Sacramento standards, but they were prosperous and, more importantly, happy. Thomas Garrison became a frequent visitor, doting on his grandchildren and finally appreciating the strong, capable woman his daughter had become. He admitted once, late one evening over whiskey on the porch, that Sophia had been right to run, right to choose love over security. "You found something real," he said, watching Victor play with the children in the yard. "Something that cannot be bought or arranged. I am grateful you were brave enough to fight for it." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Victor presented Sophia with a gift. It was a carved wooden box, beautifully rendered with flowers and vines. Inside was a folded piece of paper, the marriage certificate from that hasty ceremony in Rough and Ready, preserved carefully all these years. "I wanted you to have this," Victor said, his voice soft, "a reminder of the day we chose each other, despite everything stacked against us." Sophia took the certificate, tears streaming down her face as she read the simple words that had joined their lives. "I have never regretted that choice, not for a single day. You are the best decision I ever made, Victor Young. And you are mine." He pulled her close, his arms still as strong as the day he had carried her through the wilderness, his love as steady as the mountains surrounding them. "My brave, fierce, beautiful wife, who was not afraid to demand the life she deserved." They stood together on the porch of their home, looking out over the land they had built together through hard work and love, watching their children play in the last golden light of evening. The girl who had once cried, "I won't marry that giant," had found something far more precious than she ever could have imagined. She had found a gentle giant whose hands could be both powerful and tender, who had shown her what true partnership looked like, who had given her not just love, but freedom, respect, and a life of purpose. And the mountain man, who had lived alone for so many years, had found that his cabin was not really a home until Sophia filled it with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of family. Together, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of courage and choice and love that conquered all obstacles. As the stars began to appear overhead and the mountain air grew cool with evening, Victor lifted Sophia's hand to his lips, kissing the simple gold band she still wore after a decade of marriage. "Thank you for running into my mountains," he murmured. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for being worth running to," Sophia replied, her heart full to bursting with love for this man, this life, this beautiful, unlikely happily ever after that had started with an impulsive escape and a twisted ankle on a mountain trail. Years continued to roll by like the seasons, each bringing new challenges and deeper love. Samuel, their eldest, grew tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind and head for numbers. Rose inherited Victor's gentle spirit and Sophia's determination, becoming a skilled healer who learned herbcraft from the Miwok families who still lived in the higher elevations. Benjamin was the wild one, always exploring, always pushing boundaries, keeping his parents on their toes but filling their lives with adventure and laughter. The homestead prospered beyond their initial dreams. Victor's timber operation expanded carefully, always with respect for the land that provided for them. Sophia's business acumen transformed their small operation into something larger, and they eventually employed several men from Sacramento and the mining camps, paying fair wages and treating their workers with the same respect Victor had once shown to a frightened young woman on a mountain trail. Thomas Garrison passed away peacefully in his sleep when Samuel was 15, having spent his final years as a beloved grandfather and true friend to his son-in-law. In his will, he left the Sacramento Mercantile to Sophia, acknowledging that she had always had the head for business he should have trusted from the beginning. Sophia and Victor decided to keep the store but hire a manager, using the profits to further expand their mountain operations and ensure their children would have choices about their futures. On a crisp autumn morning, nearly 20 years after that fateful day when Sophia had run into the hills, the whole family gathered on the porch of their now substantial home. Samuel was preparing to leave for San Francisco, where he would study business and finance. Rose was courting a young doctor from Sacramento, a kind man who had won both her heart and her parents' approval by treating her as an equal partner. And Benjamin, at 14, was already talking about exploring the territories further east, following in his father's wandering footsteps. "They are all leaving," Sophia said softly, leaning against Victor as they watched their children preparing for their various journeys. "When did they grow up?" "While we were busy living," Victor replied, his arms solid around her waist. "But they are not really leaving. They are just spreading wings we helped them grow. They will come back. This will always be home." And he was right. The children did come back again and again over the years, bringing spouses and eventually grandchildren of their own. The homestead that Victor and Sophia had built became a gathering place for a growing family, a testament to what could be achieved when two people chose love over fear, courage over convention. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their grown children organized a celebration that brought together people from all corners of their lives. Former workers and their families, friends from Sacramento and the mining camps, even some of the Miwok families who had taught Victor so much about living in harmony with the mountains. The house overflowed with food and laughter and music, and Sophia found herself pulled into a dance by her husband, his strength undiminished despite the silver threading through his dark hair. "Do you remember?" Victor murmured as they moved together to the fiddle music. "When you told me you would not marry that giant?" Sophia laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was 20. "I was talking about Bernard Hutchins. I never meant you." "I know. But I am a giant, and you did marry me. So in a way, you were wrong." "I was never more happy to be wrong about anything." Sophia reached up to touch his bearded face, still strong and handsome despite the years. "You changed my mind, Victor Young. Your gentle hands and gentle heart changed everything." He pulled her closer, swaying to the music, surrounded by the family and community they had built together. "No, my love. You changed your own mind. You were brave enough to demand better, to run toward what you wanted instead of accepting what was expected. I just had the great fortune to be the man you ran toward." As the party continued around them, as their grandchildren played in the yard where their own children had once played, as the mountains stood eternal and strong behind their home, Sophia reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From a desperate flight into the wilderness to a love story that had spanned decades, from a frightened girl to a confident woman who had built an empire alongside her mountain man husband. She had found her happily ever after, not in a grand mansion or a society wedding, but in a cabin in the mountains with a man whose hands were as gentle as they were strong, whose love was as steadfast as the ancient peaks surrounding them. And every morning when she woke beside him, every evening when they sat together watching the sunset over their land, she gave thanks for that day. She had twisted her ankle on a mountain trail and been found by the gentle giant who would become her entire world. The night of their anniversary celebration, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, Victor and Sophia sat together on their porch swing, wrapped in a shared blanket against the autumn chill. The stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain air, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. "I would do it all again," Sophia said suddenly. "Every difficult moment, every hardship, every sacrifice, I would do it all again to end up right here, right now, with you." Victor's arm tightened around her. "As would I. You were worth every fight, every challenge, every moment of doubt. You were always worth it." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had learned long ago that the best conversations often happened without words. When the cold finally drove them inside, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom hand in hand, their steps in perfect synchronization after 3 decades of walking through life together. Years continued their inevitable march, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with a life fully lived. Victor's hair turned completely silver, and his movements slowed slightly, but his love for Sophia never diminished. Sophia's face gained lines, and her hands showed the marks of hard work, but to Victor, she was as beautiful as the day he had first found her on that mountain trail, defiance blazing in her green eyes. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, 5 generations of love and legacy that had started with one young woman's desperate flight from a marriage she feared and one mountain man's simple act of kindness. The homestead had grown into a small town, with families who had come to work for Victor and Sophia staying to build their own lives in the mountains. There was a school now, a church, a proper store, all built on the foundation of community and respect that the Youngs had established. When Sophia was 72, she fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. The doctors came from Sacramento doing everything they could, but everyone knew the outcome was uncertain. Victor never left her side, holding her hand through the fevers and chills, whispering words of love and encouragement, refusing to accept that their time together might be ending. "I'm not ready to lose you," he said one night when her fever was especially high, his voice breaking. "I have loved you for more than half a century, and it is still not enough. I need more time." Sophia, even in her weakened state, squeezed his hand. "You will never lose me. I am in your heart, in our children, in every tree and stone of this place we built together. I am in the mountains themselves, Victor. I will always be with you." But she rallied, as she had so many times before, her determination and Victor's devoted care pulling her back from the edge. When spring came and she was finally strong enough to sit on the porch again, Victor carried her there in his arms as he had carried her so many times before, his strength undiminished by age when it came to the woman he loved. "You are still carrying me through wilderness," Sophia joked, her voice weak but her spirit strong. "Always," Victor replied. "I will carry you through whatever wilderness comes, until my last breath." They had 5 more beautiful years together, years of gentle mornings and peaceful evenings, of watching their family grow and thrive, of sitting together in the swing they had shared for decades, holding hands and counting stars. When Sophia finally passed away in her sleep at 77, Victor was beside her as he had always been, her hand held gently in his large, scarred, infinitely tender hands. The funeral brought hundreds of people to the mountain homestead, testament to the lives Sophia and Victor had touched over their years together. Stories were told of Sophia's courage, her business brilliance, her unwavering love for her family, of Victor's strength and gentleness, his wisdom and kindness, his absolute devotion to the woman who had chosen him against all odds. Victor lived 3 more years, cared for by his children and grandchildren, still maintaining the homestead, still carving beautiful things from wood, still looking up at the mountains that had witnessed his greatest love story. On what would have been their 58th wedding anniversary, he sat in the porch swing alone, holding the wooden box that contained their marriage certificate and other treasured mementos of their life together. Samuel found him there the next morning, at peace, a gentle smile on his weathered face, his eyes looking toward the trail where he had first found a frightened young woman with a twisted ankle and blazing green eyes. His family buried him beside Sophia on a hill overlooking the homestead, under a stand of ancient pines, together for eternity in the mountains they had loved. Their story became legend in the region, the tale of the society girl who had run from an arranged marriage and found true love with a mountain man. But for those who had known them, who had witnessed their partnership and devotion, it was not a legend, but a living example of what love could be when built on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering commitment. The homestead continued to thrive, passed down through generations of youngs, each adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that Victor and Sophia had laid. The original cabin, carefully preserved, became a cherished landmark, a reminder of where it all began with a simple act of kindness and a love that had proved stronger than any obstacle. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispers through the pines, people swear they can feel the presence of the young woman and her gentle giant, still walking hand in hand through the mountains they had claimed as their own, their love story eternal as the ancient peaks that had witnessed it all. A love that had begun with a cry of, "I won't marry that giant," and had transformed into the most beautiful happily ever after anyone in those mountains had ever known, proving that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings.